this is not an overnight process. It takes us generally 6 months to 18 months.
Enough's enough. It's time for us to exit the business.
If you don't, you're going to end up selling that business. It's still the original location. The building has not changed at all.
Do you think you should have an exit plan from the beginning?
Do your best to detach yourself emotionally.
All right, welcome back to another episode of How I Franchise This. Today we are joined by Sherman Walters. He's got an awesome story. He's grew up in franchising, ran a franchise, sold a franchise, and is now also working on his own pretty cool business. And we'll jump right in. Why don't you introduce yourself and just share which brand you were involved with?
From the time I was born, actually, I was born into a franchise business. My family was Dairy Queen. My father was a Dairy Queen operator. I had 2 little stores here in Charlotte, and I joke with people I used to sleep inside of an ice cream cone box, and I'm not kidding, because that was what my mom would do. My 2 brothers were older, and they would just haul me back and forth to work with them. And when it came time to go to bed, Mom would empty out an ice cream cone box about this long, leave some dirty dish towels in it, and say, "All right, go to sleep." And I'd go to sleep there in the store and wake up at home the next morning and didn't never know the difference. But
How did they get into it? How did they find Dairy Queen and get into that business?
my dad was running Biltmore Dairy, which is, as you can imagine, part of the Biltmore family out in Asheville. Well, they owned a dairy and they had a distribution center here in Charlotte. He was running that distribution center, and that's how he got connected to Dairy Queen operators. And there was only a handful at that time, but this was back in the early 70s. Yeah. And yeah, so he just got connected and made really good friends with one of the guys. And when the guy was ready to retire, he said, I didn't really have any family to pass it off to. So he approached my dad and said, "Hey, do you want this store?" And I think he kind of laughed at him at first, like, "Yeah, right. I don't have any money. What are you talking about?" And he says, "Well, I didn't ask you that. I asked you if you wanted this store." And he says, "Well, yeah, I'd love it. I'd love to. What are you talking about?" He says, "All right, I'm gonna give it to you, and we're gonna finance." And they wrote the deal on the back of a napkin, just like that. And that's how he got into the business. I'm sorry, but yeah, and I think that was like 1974. So
That's crazy.
yeah,
Dairy Queen's one of the original, I feel like, franchise brands up there with McDonald's and some of the other ones. And shout out to Minnesota, where I'm from originally. That's where they're headquartered. Of all places, an ice cream place started in 6 months of winter. But I mean, growing up around that, did that impact you, I guess, at all? You're an entrepreneur now. Do you think growing up, seeing your family doing that had a big impact on that? Were you involved in the store at a young age?
very involved in, for 14, 15, honestly, before that, I was 12 years old at the cash register ringing people up, and, I guess because of the exposure, because I was always really attracted to the small business kind of mindset, it just was what it was. I didn't know any other kind of lifestyle. My father would show up at a little league game in the first inning and be gone by the fourth inning, because where he had to go back to work. And I think that was more of most basically, the way he was brought up, just to work hard. He didn't have any education. Actually, I think he dropped out of school in the 6th grade, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. Well, that's the way they did it back in, this was back in the 30s or early 40s, so, and in the country, growing up on a tobacco farm, that just was what it was. You had the option. And so he came home from school one day and said, "Dad, I don't want to go back to school." He says, "Well," I think he tries some reverse psychology. He says, "Well, you have 2 options. You can either go to school or come work on the farm." And he said, "I'm going to come work on the farm." And, and my grandfather was a tobacco sharecropper down like, the side of the state. But, and I think that kind of backfired a little bit. So he says, "Well, okay, I guess you come and work on the farm." And, that's what he did, until the early 50s when he moved to Charlotte and, hooked up a Biltmore Dairy. Yeah.
That is crazy, from tobacco farm to Dairy Queen franchise. Sorry, you grow up in, a household of, entrepreneurs at this point. You're running the cash register. Did you in your mind think like someday I'm going to take this over? Or were you like the rebel? Like, I don't want to be, as soon as I can, I'm getting away from this and doing something.
They think they know it, but they don't know it. And then, kind of seeing that side of it. And at one point saying, "No, I want to go another direction." Yeah. But there was always that in the back of the mind. It was like, it's going to be something similar, kind of a small business, something of that nature. Of course, went to college and did the college thing and came out to work in the advertising world for a couple of years and realized that wasn't really for me. So kind of got roped back into the family business and that was where it started again, so.
So you went and worked, you went out into the world for a little bit doing advertising. When you came back to the family business, how many locations? Was it Dairy Queen? Or there other concepts that the family got into eventually?
No, we had, 2 little stores here in Charlotte.
Were they part of that same original deal with that one seller who was like, "Hey, you want these in the store?"
Oh, yeah.
One that he
It
added.
was one, and then, like, 10 years later, my sister had moved to Kansas City, and I guess my dad figured, if he bought her a business, she would come back, and she did, and so he bought that business to kinda lure her back from Kansas City, and, she and her husband went back. They ran that store. My sister passed away when I was, like, 10, so and she was, like, 20 years older than me, but her husband then left and started his own store. That store went to my oldest brother, and he started running it. And there was a time when every Dairy Queen in this market was owned by somebody in my family. Not necessarily us, but somebody in our direct family. And so yeah, so it's the way it was, and then just went into it.
So you were doing the advertising, you said, "Hey, it's time to come back." Were you in Charlotte doing that? Or okay, so you're in Charlotte, you're like,
I went to App State and they came back to Charlotte. Yeah,
"Okay," and then you're like, "I wanna get back into the family business."
plug for App State.
What sparked the interest to come back into the family business?
When you've grown up in that reality and the control that it allows you to have over your own life, even though you don't have some control, but you have control, right? And I didn't like that feeling of not being in control because it was, I worked with ad agencies, and of course, your clients couldn't pay their bills, you went, and so I worked for like 3 different firms in like 4 years, so it was like, I didn't like the non-stability of that, and so then it was looking at the options. What am I going to do? And that option, presented itself. And, the idea was that I went into it. I have 2 brothers. They were both in the business at the time, that we would expand from there. So we ended up not expanding the Dairy Queen, but ended up going into a retail business, for about 7 years, and, started like three units of that.
What was that
It was,
business?
As Seen on TV,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
sales stores. Yeah, we operated in Carolina Place Mall, Concord Mills Mall, mall up in Hickory.
And why did you guys decide to do that versus adding more Dairy Queens or more franchise concepts?
Cost.
Okay.
Yeah, the cost of getting into, at that time, Dairy Queen had changed their model from this model to, say, the new grill and chill model. That was in the grill.
That's right, it used to be just ice cream.
And so it was, in our opinion, the return on the investment at that time was not there. It is now, but not that they've driven out the efficiencies of it. But at that time, and that was the only thing they were developing. So we said, well, that's not an option for us. And another Dairy Queen franchise operator I knew in Atlanta that had started a couple of these, and he says, why don't y'all do these? I said, okay, why not?
So franchising still, kinda got you into the next thing, that network, that community of people. So he was having some success with the As Seen on TV, and you guys said, "Let's go for it, timing's right."
Yeah, I mean, the cost of entry was so low. It was cost of the inventory, and of course, upfitting a small retail space in a mall is really not that extensive. So
And were you still running the Dairy Queens in parallel? Okay. So you guys are doing that. This was 2004 to 2010?
let's say, yeah, right around there. Yeah.
And after years of running the business, what ultimately led you guys to decide to sell? I guess before you even get to that point, what was it like operating? You grew up in it, but what was it like operating that business and trying to add other things at the same time? Was it a ton of work? Was it?
Well, we had 2 stores and 3 brothers.
Okay.
Is really kind of what it boiled down to.
Yep.
And it was, so one of my brothers wanted to do the retail side, so I stayed in the Dairy Queen business. And then my other brother and I would run those 2 stores together. Yeah. And so while he was out doing his thing, we then kind of had these 3 units over here and then these 2 Dairy Queen units. And we worked as a team.
Yep, and as much as you're comfortable sharing too, I think some people listening like to hear about, like, "Hey, what's it really like?" And, like, "Is it exciting?" And, like, how were revenues good? Were they what you guys expected? Or were you like, "Ah, we're working really hard and the juice isn't worth the squeeze." Is there any of that kind of feedback of, like, behind the curtain? Again, you don't have to share numbers, but
What we had was a known entity at that time. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like I jumped into a new venture, so they were existing entities. So we knew what we had. Um, and fortunately, we were with a great brand, that had, dates way back to the 1940s, so, the integrity and the the brand value there was tremendous. I put it right up there with like McDonald's or anything else. Um, so we had to strengthen that brand behind us, and so that we felt very comfortable. We knew what the ebbs and flows of the business were going to be year in, year out. It's like last year we did this. Here's our benchmarks for this year. But and ideally we'd like to see about a 5 to 7% increase every year. So
Are these like multi-million-dollar locations, or are they
nah, these were small little dessert only kind of concepts. Like the old school, they were the old school walk up window
Yeah.
design. In fact, we just finally sold our last store that was built in 1946 here in Charlotte. It's still the original location. The building has not changed at all. The exterior, I mean, we exchanged some components of the exterior, but it's still the original structure. And that's kind of a landmark here. And then the other store was the same. It was built 10 years later in 1956. So one store was built in 1946, one was built in 1956, and those structures are still standing there.
that's crazy. Okay, so, you know, it was obviously doing well enough to sustain, you and 2 brothers, plus you guys were getting into the other businesses. When you guys did decide, I mean, I guess what one more operational question, then when you guys decide to sell it, when you're operating it, how did you guys divide responsibilities and who owned what and who worked on it? Or was it kind of just like, hey, who's first man on deck? Who's available to go solve the problem? And you all knew how to do, everything.
For us, it was easy. I had two stores. One brother ran one store. I ran the other. Um, and then the other brother ran the SNL TV stores.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was really kind of, you were in charge of that entity. Yeah, that entity.
And then all right, you guys have this down operationally for the most part. You're able to manage. You guys are partners on these 3 different things. When did you guys decide, hey, enough's enough. It's time for us to exit the business and, sell these locations or get out of the business?
I started volunteering for a lot of positions, volunteer positions on different councils. That was the one thing Dairy Queen was really great about, was they didn't make brands for the decisions for the brand without getting at least buy-in from the franchise community. And so worked on a number of initiatives like supply chain, menu management, marketing, all that kind of stuff. And I think, I'm here, this small unit operator here in Charlotte, North Carolina. I'm sitting around a table representing the Southeast US with other guys around the table. And these guys have 10 stores, 15 stores, 5 stores, whatever the case may be. And I'm the small guy at the table, figuratively speaking, not literally, uh, but I'm the small operator at the table, and really started to kind of understand that my voice was being listened to. Not only being listened to, but they were implementing a lot of my ideas. And I said, well, hey, and then coming back to run these small little stores, it wasn't fulfilling. Sometimes you get that feeling. It's like there's something else I'm supposed to be doing with my life. And I think I was around 35 or so at that time, 30, 35. I can't remember how old it was, but it just felt like there was something different out there. And that was when the thought permeated. And then ironically, the company that I own now, the founder of that company was standing outside my store eating a large butterscotch dip cone. And his name was Bob Dowdy. He was the founder of National Restaurant Properties. And that was what National Restaurant Properties did. They bought and helped people buy and sell restaurants. And so I saw him out there, and I walked out and said hello, and how you doing? And how you been doing? I said, well, I'm thinking about selling these. Would you mind taking a look at them? And so he did. And we got back together about a week later, and he said, we ran through the numbers with me and said, yeah, here's what I feel like I can get. I said, man, shucks. It's really not what I was anticipating. And we hear that all the time. Anytime we evaluate a business for somebody, it's never the number that they thought it was. And certainly, that was the case for me. I said, oh gosh, man. I said, that's not really what I was hoping for. And me and Bob said, sure, I understand. He says, I was curious. He said, what were you going to do if you did sell the places? And, I have this bad habit of my mouth working before my brain does. And I just popped out and said, oh, Bob, I was going to work for you, man. And you got to know him. I mean, he was about in his late 60s at the time, walking with a cane. He leaned in, he says, I like that idea. And that's how the conversation got going. And so, like 2 weeks later, I was working with him. Started with him full, was supposed to be part time, but I never did it part time. I just got engrossed in the business and loved everything about it.
And that business was basically buying and selling restaurants, like helping people buy and sell restaurants.
Yeah, we're a full service commercial real estate firm. I mean, we do handle leasing, investment properties, things of that nature. But primarily, I'd probably say the biggest bulk of our business comes from business brokers. So we help specifically people in the food service industry, franchises, independents, whatever the case may be. We help them buy and sell restaurants. So we are a brokerage firm that
And you will work on both the buyer side and the seller side.
both sides of that deal. Typically, that's a little bit of a difference between the kind of general commercial real estate world, which is kind of like residential in the sense that you're usually co-broking with another firm because of the sensitivity of confidentiality. With especially in the restaurant world, and that we protect that with everything we've got. So we don't do a lot of co-broking in that realm. We do, but just not a lot. Usually we're working both sides of the deal,
Okay.
and there's usually one person inside the firm that's working with the buyer and one person working with the seller. Sometimes they're working with both, but our objective is to get both parties to kind of meet in the middle and be that kind of intermediary. And a lot of times, truthfully, it's helping them get out of their own way to get the deal done. Yeah. Because as you can imagine, there's a lot of emotional connection to that business when somebody's looking to sell it. Whether it's successful or isn't successful, there's still an emotional attachment to that business. It always will be the case. A lot of heart, a lot of soul, a lot of blood, spilled into it. So they obviously, a lot of people will say, I don't care as long as I get money in the bank, you can sell it to whoever you want to. No, that's not true. They always care. And it always matters because listen, you're leaving behind your staff, which is your family. You spend more time with them than you do your family. So you're leaving behind a staff that a lot of people you care about. You want to make sure that they're in good hands. And so there's a spirit there that, you want to make sure that whoever's coming in the door to buy your business is going to take care of them.
What did that process look like for you? I mean, the good thing, your business today, like you can easily talk to all this because you've been through it yourself. Like, what was that like for you and your brothers? Was it a tough decision? Like, hey, mom and dad started this, way back when. Was there some of that kind of emotional tie for you guys?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this was, and like I said, my father's 92 years old and we just sold our last store like 3 months ago. And now he doesn't know what to do. He's at home. He doesn't know what to do with himself. But and I'm pretty sure my mom might wish he would go back to work. But 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 no, I mean that's 50 years of his life poured into that business. It's all he's ever known. I mean, literally 50 plus years. Yeah, it's crazy to think of being in one business that long. It just doesn't happen anymore. Nobody does that anymore. But he did. Yeah, he just it was all he knew how to do, and so he just kept running with it.
What was it like navigating that decision with him, your brothers? Was it, hey, were you guys on the fence of like, hey, let's stick this out, let's keep growing it, or was it just clear like,
Actually, when I approached Bob about selling the business, we actually did not end up selling the business.
okay,
We kept it, and I did both. So basically, I would start at 8:30 in the morning with National Restaurant Properties till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I would go to the store. I would get all my. I had a good manager at that point, so I would go to the store, get my books done, have any kind of staff meetings that I needed to have until like 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and then I would do that probably, and then work the store on the weekends. I mean, I was burning it at both ends for a couple of years before I finally decided. At that time, though, our as seen on TV business had wound down, and my brother exited that business, and then came and took over the Dairy Queen so that I could go focus on this. Yeah, and like he ran that until 3 months ago, give or take. Yeah.
and then as like that decision to wind down, was that a family decision? Like, did you guys all get together and
Yeah, there's a mental process that happens in business, in general, is that he had actually purchased another business and was trying to run both, but being pulled back here and just not really being able to create the systems and procedures that he needed to be able to step outside and do that. And so for him, it was just he was just running too ragged. He was doing too much. And of course, my father had been retired for 30 years, give or take 25, 30 years. So That was the point at which we decided to sell it. Yeah. Is that, yeah. And listen, people sell for lots of different reasons. That's the biggest misconception out there is that you're selling a business because it's not working. What's wrong with it? Why are you selling? People sell businesses for lots of reasons.
Lifestyle decision.
Lifestyle decisions, I mean, you just, every decade, your priorities change, give or take. It seems to be the cycle every decade or so, your priorities in life change. And so sometimes the priorities just don't line up with that business anymore. Yeah. So
When so you've uniquely seen it as someone that's gone through it with family members, and you've also helped a number of people, sell their businesses and exit. Do you think more, whether it's a franchisee or an independent business owner, should have an exit plan from the beginning, from the onset? Like, should that be in the back of their mind, earlier than most usually do?
if I were to give the best advice I can give somebody is like I said a minute ago, I don't care what you do. There's an emotional attachment to that business, but do your best to detach yourself emotionally and treat it like a business. And as such, you should always be structuring your business for an exit because you never know when that exit's going to come.
Right.
Right.
Oh, you're ready.
And that's the way to maximize the value of it, obviously, is to always have it set up to sell it. And where that decision comes or not is irrelevant, but you're always positioned to do that. Now, inevitably, what happens is most people get an emotional connection, and then a life circumstance changes, and then they need to sell. And then they call us up. I go in and I look, start opening up the books and realizing, okay, I wish more people would take the approach of calling us a year before or 18 months before, because there's things that we can do to maximize the value of that business. But inevitably, most people call us when they've made that decision to sell. And it's almost like they not only made the decision to sell, they've made the decision to do whatever else. And this is not an overnight process. It takes us generally 6 months to 18 months to sell a business. And one, we should be able to get it prepared. Get make sure your CPA is doing your books in a way that shows that value. It shows exactly where everything is going. Um, getting it positioned so that it is financeable from a lender. If you don't, you're going to end up selling that business and financing it yourself because that's just the way it happens. Not many people pay cash for a business. Usually there's some element of financing there. It's either the bank or it's you. So take your pick. Now, with interest rates where they are right now, that's actually advantageous. But when they were at 3 or 4%, there's not really much of an advantage there. Now you can actually get a little bit of money from financing it. On top, actually, usually 10% or so usually pays what a brokerage fee is. So you save that. But yeah, I think that's the biggest advice I can get is detach emotionally from the business as much as you possibly can. Treat it like a business. So many people treat it like it's another family, and it is in a sense, but you need to prioritize that, and I'm not talking about work-life balance. I'm just talking about what can I be doing to this business to make it better so that if somebody else were taking it over tomorrow, it would make that transition easier or it would make it more valuable.
I always used to, like, whether it was a small business, a restaurant, a franchise, or a tech startup, like what we're working on, I always try to tell people it's like my personal, brand and identity isn't like one to one tied to the business. Like at the end of the day, I care way more about the business itself, its success, its longevity, its ability to, withstand the test of time. I'm just part of the story right now. It is not who I am, and I don't need this emotional tie. I care about it, and I want to see it succeed. But I agree with you. I think trying to break up the two and not make them as mutually exclusive or like tied one to one together is important because I think too many people do get emotionally hung up on it and they start to make emotional decisions or rush decisions.
It is the worst place you can be. Yeah, absolutely. I was actually having a conversation before I came over here with somebody on my team, and it was really relying, in those circumstances where somebody is not making money, for whatever reason. And again, that in that case, we're not selling a business as much as we're selling assets of that business for somebody else to kind of come in, rebrand it, do their thing. And usually you can do that for about 30 cents or what it costs to build, 30 to 40% of what it costs to start from scratch. So there's a value to doing that. But when people get into that circumstance, it's almost like something clicks and all logic and reason go out the window. When your back's against the wall, it's just that logic and reason just disappear for whatever reason. And listen, it would probably happen with me as well if I wasn't aware of it because of being exposed to it. But that's therein lies that emotional connection. There's thinking about things that do not matter. At the end of the day, it's about getting you out of this business, insulating you from your liabilities on the lease or whatever that case that might be. That's ultimately what we're trying to achieve, is not maximizing the value. Yes, we want to get as much as we possibly can because we make more money. We make more the more we get for it. So we obviously want that, but the market is what the market is. And sometimes it's less about the money and it's more about bringing somebody to the table that can fulfill those obligations for you wholly to insulate you from further liabilities that might creep up downstream. For example, I mean, everybody, you do a commercial lease, you're signing a personal guarantee, which says, I don't care if I die, I don't care, man, I'm bounding my heirs to this. My estate must pay this lease come hell or high water. And that's an obligation, and
Are those transferable when you sell the business?
the leases are transferable, but the personal guarantee stays in place.
Really?
That's what a lot of people
More
don't
like
realize.
always.
Almost always,
What?
unless you structured that, and that's one of the key elements that I try to teach people. And is when you're negotiating a lease on the front end, you can't get out of a personal guarantee. But what you can do is structure it upon exit to say that there's a limited guarantee. For example, if you sign a 10-year lease with a personal guarantee, you're guaranteeing that whole entire balance. Um, When you sell the business to me and after you've been there for 3 years, somebody else is coming in and signing another personal guarantee as kind of a buffer between you and the landlord. But if they don't work out, that's 7 years. A lot can happen in 7 years. Literally, they can go bankrupt, and that landlord come back to you 5 years later, say, "Sorry, you signed on to this." So yeah, I mean that's just part of the deal.
Is the buyer in that first lien position once they buy it?
So the buyer, the new tenant that's taking your, so we're doing a lease assignment. So we're signing a lease. So the lease is an asset. At the end of the day, you're signing that lease from one party, one entity to another entity. This personal guarantee stays in place. This personal guarantee is kind of a buffer.
But it's on
So
top of it, gets exhausted
if
first?
there's a North Carolina statute, and it's specifically in North Carolina, that they must first get everything they can out of this person,
The buyer, the person who's
the
bought the
new
business.
person. Yes,
Okay,
yeah, before they will pursue. Now,
okay.
that's specific to North Carolina, though, so I don't know what other
Okay.
states do. Yeah, yeah. So, but that's just something you want to be very mindful of when signing a commercial lease. Is that's why some people say I want as maximum term. No, you want break up 5-year increments
Okay.
because that's a way to minimize your liability. Right.
Okay.
That's as much advantageous to you as it is to them, the landlord.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. And the last like one or two questions is more just like kind of general advice or, reflection on business ownership. What's one thing you think people get wrong about franchising or just owning and operating a business in general, small business?
They don't know what they don't know, and you never will. Even taking over an existing business that may have cash flow in place, you're going to go through a 6-month period there of adjustment that's going to impact your bottom line, right? So you can never really anticipate that you're going to have that full bottom line that the other person had, just because of the transitional period. And I mean, for us specifically, Food Network is a great thing for the public, but it paints a kind of an unclear reality, and that it glamorizes the restaurant business. And listen, I mean, I am notorious for somebody sitting across the table from me and saying, "Can I save you a couple $100,000?" Because this business will chew you up and spit you out. Our industry is so unique, from the business skills that it requires, and the there's so many different elements that you have to be hitting on all cylinders to be successful. and nobody has that. And I think that's the challenge is if you're not a capable delegator, if you're not a capable of turning over things to people and letting them run with them, you know, yes, they're not going to do it like you would. You got you just got to realize that they're not going to do it like you would. But you know, what? Maybe they're going to do it better.
Yep.
Maybe they'll do it better because truthfully, that may not be. That's not something you need to really be focused on. You know, and that's an exercise that I kind of take people through is what are all these different ingredients and businesses that need to be successful under this one roof? 8 to 9, 10 different things. None of us are good at all of them. Yeah. You turn the admin of my business over to me, we're in trouble. This is not my strong suit. You know, I'm good at this. You know, I'm good at connecting with people. I'm good at helping people through their business. My own admin, no, I got to turn that over to somebody. And you know, it took me 2 or 3 years to realize that when you know taxes started backing up, I'm like, oh shucks, you know, um, no, turn that over to somebody. You know, that's probably the first element of any business that I would say. Make sure you hire a good bookkeeper that understands your business and understands the ebbs and flows and how things should work. Because you can't, as they say, you can't fix what you can't measure,
Right.
right? And if you're not measuring it, and on a
It's your
the end of it,
compass.
yeah, that's your compass. I mean, you have to be looking at it daily, weekly to make sure you're on target with your goals. And if you don't have that information handy, then you're just flying blind. You know, and I think that's the mistake that people probably the most biggest mistake that people make is not knowing what they don't know, but also underestimating all the things that they do need to know and how to plug the right people into those places to fill those gaps for you. Yeah. We all have to look inward of ourselves saying, what am I good at? Yeah. I'm a restaurateur. I can barely cook an egg. Yeah. I mean, you know, I'm not a cook, you know, but I understand the business side of the restaurant business. So would I go open up a fine dining restaurant and be beholden to a chef? No, not likely because that's so far out of my element, you know. But I can go open up a multitude of other businesses that don't require, which is why I'm more gravitated towards franchises because I don't want to be a menu man. I don't want to develop a menu, you
Right.
know. And you know that's just one element of the business that I don't really want to be. You know, I understand them managing the menu, making sure this is profitable. What are we 86? What are we cut off? You know what? You know all these different things that we need to manage that menu and say that's profitable. That's not. We're not getting crossover, you know, of our ingredients. So we're ending up with a lot of waste, things of that nature. So those elements I understand, but I can't cook. Just ask my girlfriend. Yeah, she'll tell you I can't cook.
Well, the last question is kind of related to what I just asked you is if someone approached you today, looking for advice on franchising or buying a franchise business, what would you share with them, especially as it relates to, long-term thinking, a potential exit someday?
You know, more often than not, the people that come into my office and sit down with us, and this is the process where they're just kind of they think they know what they want, but we sit down with them and kind of help them see different, see things differently. Again, we're filling the gaps that they're not aware of.
Mhm.
You know, so we're helping them formulate a strategy as far as based on our experience. Where should you kind of gravitate towards? You know, the biggest misconceptions I think about franchises that people don't understand is yes, you're losing control. You're losing control of a lot of things that you just can't change. You know, so but there's also the upsides of that of all the support that you typically get. And that's also a big misconception is that that's not part of your franchise agreement. Support.
Mm.
Look in any franchise agreement. I didn't realize this till about probably 2.5, 3 years ago. Somebody pointed this out to me. I said, wait a minute. You mean I open a restaurant up, a franchise restaurant? They're not, yes, they do provide you support, obviously, because it's in their best interest too. But nowhere in your franchise agreement, in most cases that I've ever seen, does it say we are giving you support in your business. No, that business is yours
Yep.
to run. But there's so many elements of a food service business. Again, like I was saying, and none of us is good at all of them.
Yep.
So if you're somebody that's good at business, but not necessarily wants to spend time, creating a menu, and you don't want to hire a chef, yeah, you're losing an element of control, but you're also gaining control. getting control of your life a little bit in a lot of ways. So, but then listen, I'm not saying I'm not an advocate for one or the other, independent or franchise. I would personally more gravitate towards franchises, but there are a lot of people that are so creative in this industry that no, they should not be held back from their creativity. If that's their strong suit, they shouldn't be held back from that.
Depends on what you're good at,
It
your goals are, your risk
Yeah,
tolerance. I mean,
exactly.
so many things go into
Yeah,
it.
and of course, you're obviously minimizing risk a little bit, but are you buying into a Dairy Queen or a McDonald's brand or Jersey Mike's, or are you buying into a new brand that's 10 units? Well, obviously, there's not a lot of track record there. So you got to really feel good about these people that are running this brand and that they're going to make the right decisions for the brand. Yeah. Look at Quiznos.
Yeah.
They took a downhill turn really quick.
After selling
I had friends,
Darian
I had friends
Busters.
that ran that business at the time, and they were lucky to get out when they did. So like I say, famous last word of any restaurant brand is recently acquired by X and X Equity Group. Because that's when the focus on quality and the focus on the things that do matter in this industry go out the window. Generally speaking, I'm not saying that about every, equity group. Obviously, there's been many that are very successful, but generally speaking, their focus is different than what it should be. Their focus is on
More on
bottom
the
line. Yeah. Yeah. Driving revenue growth, not bottom line growth, because revenue growth is what puts money in their pocket.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of things to consider, but ultimately, I think, if you look at a business, if in specifically in a franchise or in the food service business, if you're looking at this and saying, I like that business, I love the service aspect, I love being able to shake people's hands, every customer walks in my door, but maybe you're not good at a couple of these elements, especially the creative element, well, then, yeah, franchise is definitely for you. Yeah. Whereas if you're more that creative chef type, it's probably not for you. So
That's really good advice. I think it's just like finding that fit, identifying, you being self-aware and, understanding.
there are franchises that give you freedom.
Yeah.
There's one great one. I like this brand, Grey Harvest Brand Company. I think they've got a new leadership now, but they call themselves a freedom franchise. It's exactly what they call it. So they freedom franchise is that
Cool.
in that this is the basis of our brand, which is the bakery element. And then there's the cafe brand. There's other different elements that you can kind of be creative as far as what fits in your market,
Interesting.
so to speak.
That's really cool. I
Yeah,
haven't heard of that.
that was the first time I had heard of it as well, and I don't think I've heard of it. Yeah, but there's brands out there that give you that little bit more creativity. And well, the upside, of course, if you're going with a 2,000 unit brand that's well entrenched, a new brand over here with 10 to 15 units, well, then there's also opportunity there for you to participate in the development of that brand because it's a partnership. It should be. That franchise or should look at you as a partner and vice versa. You should look at them as a partner as well. And that's why it's important to make sure you know your goals and your personalities that you're equally yoked with where they want to drive the brand too.
That's a really good point. Like something we talk about with our clients is how entrepreneurial do you want or need to be if you're looking for steady, consistent, predictable revenue and cash flow. Like Chick-fil-A, you're essentially buying yourself a job. It's almost not a franchise. And then there's the group that you mentioned, it's like, sub 10 units. They want to hear from you. Like, is that working? Is that a new thing we try? Like they want you to be testing and experimenting and giving feedback. And there's everything in between that. As they get more mature and figure things out, they're less open to new ideas and what you might have to say.
There is a new Indian QSR brand, like Indian street food brand that I'm working with now. I'm actually helping them formulate some of that. Like, what does their franchisee look like? You know, how much bandwidth that was taking away from them on the operations side to kind of, be so much more involved with people and having to help them understand the very basics of the business, right? Because this is somebody that came out of IT or some other world where, it's just completely unrelated, but they've done well in that world. obviously, so they're financially capable of buying into a business like this. But again, where does the franchisor line up? How solidified are they in that process right now? That they know who they are. Um, and that's when I think when they know who they are and they know what works, that's when they're prep for success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sherman, this was awesome. I appreciate you coming on and telling your story and what you've learned from the broker side and operations side and I mean everything in between. We never know who's listening and what value they might grab out of it. So appreciate you just spending the last hour or so sharing your experience.
Uh,
Appreciate it.